So I approached Han and Randy Sakes and Nick McSpadden here originally to ask them to join in a roundtable, which will be a much more free-for-all discussion when I get through with the introductory remarks, on issues of MDM, what they've seen as strengths and weaknesses, what obstacles they've encountered, and kind of assemble a group of subject matter experts panel that can answer questions about any specific issues that you may be raising. But what I wanted to do now is set a kind of a bigger stage, a higher look, as an outcome and result of my own personal experience from inception to production of MDM systems that we are now deploying at the National Institutes of Health. It was about a 2.5-year process that we undertook. And there are some I think it's significant lessons learned that I could bring to you as a result of that process. Very early on, I'll discuss this very shortly, it was so chaotic we didn't know what we were doing. And then over the course of the last couple of years, under my leadership and as the co-chair, a federal employee, actually CIO of one of the institutes, we came to grips with we've come to grips with MDM. And that's what I'm hoping that you will come away with today. Because what I want you to think about is not so much about specific vendors or their specific what they can offer you, but get you to think about these systems and the devices they support and what they mean for you as an IT professional and your jobs, your future, and what support will look like very soon. And it's not like anything that you are accustomed to. So, here's my experience. We'll start. It's a typical plot line. 2007, Apple releases iPhones. People kind of scoff, well, what's that? It's really expensive, blah, blah, blah. Blackberries are better. The keyboards, yada, yada. We're in enterprise. Blackberries are more secure, so on and so forth. iOS 3 comes out, and suddenly ActiveSync is enabled, and security can take shape. And that was Apple's first foray into, and big flag that they are interested in the enterprise space. And they're willing to take on BlackBerry head-to-head. And at that point, the infiltration significantly and sincerely began. iOS 3, right? And we had no idea how many of these devices were connected to our Exchange services. We could have, but we have a centralized Exchange system. We weren't really thinking about that. ActiveSync is enabled by default on every user. So people were connecting in through ActiveSync, and we were like, what? And suddenly a hue and cry happened when I think it was iOS 3.1 came on and flipped a bit that said, oh, any ActiveSync encryption that you might have as a policy will now be enabled, and all the devices went absolutely brick. Because these were older generation, and they weren't ready for that. And we found out that significant numbers of CXOs and our executive officers were using these devices. And that was a big surprise. So, of course, what that meant was we were way behind the curve. So, what do you do when you get way behind the curve? Well, you suddenly panic and create a working group. And assemble a working group of people who kind of think they know what they're doing. Typically it's security officers and desktop support people, maybe a BES administrator. But you put them all together and you say, what are we going to do to stop these iOS devices from getting onto our network and making mincemeat of us, right? Security nightmare. And sure enough, that's what we did, and came up with requirements we had to identify. We were asked to research into the MDM vendors. We were supposed to come out and recommend a product, and of course, that's what we did. And when we started, there was a group of about 14 or 15 of us. We had no clue where to begin. So we grabbed anything we could think of. There was a technical security guideline. There was some Gartner research. At the time, there were about 35 vendors. By the time we were through with the discovery phase, there were 60 vendors. Within a year, the market had doubled. We looked at government guidelines, which didn't exist, really. We went to vendors who were willing to tell us anything we wanted to hear. We interviewed pre-sales staff. And we asked the users, what did they need? Of course, what the users needed was diametrically opposite of what the desktop support and IT and security people thought they needed. But that's a typical story, right? We know that. One of the interesting things that is no longer interesting that we presented to our IT management council, which is the assembly of all of our CIOs, so each of our institutes. We have 27 institutes and centers. They each have their own funding. They each have their own research agenda. They each have their own IT shop. There is a central IT, but we have more authority than power. We have no procurement power, nothing like that. We shoot out policy and offer some centralized services and hope somebody does something with it. Typically what happens is that, for instance, the National Cancer Institute, which is huge, kind of is the 800-pound gorilla that just kind of moves, and we just hope to hop on and follow along with them, right? So we get together and we present these findings to ITMC, and what we find is, yep, look, iOS devices are actually okay, people. They're actually okay, right? There's standard hardware and software. There's updates that you can rely upon through the vertical integration. There's a curated app store that's okay. Androids are a completely different matter. Today, 44% of the Android market is still on gingerbread. The malware threat that Android introduces is significant. And they are effectively unmanageable because since the APIs are open to everybody, anybody can write anything they want to. So when a vendor comes and says, hey, we can manage Androids, you have to ask better questions. So with this idea of here's how the market shapes up, what are the requirements, right? And you come up, oh, here's a requirement list, right? So we kind of make up a requirement list. And it includes, well, we want a remote wipe it. We want some sort of device recovery. We want to make sure it's all encrypted. Then we want to do things like reports. We like reports in government, as management reports. We want to be able to deep provision these devices if we need to, configure them, control them, make sure nobody's jailbreaking them, iOS patch management, all this sort of stuff. It's just an ad hoc bunch of requirements that basically were informed by desktop security. Right? And it's the only model that we had at the time. There's some bigger problems with that, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but here are our requirements, and this is what we found. After a year and a half of talking with vendors, and we talked with a lot of them. We talked with Mass 360, we talked with, and did a small pilot of Mobile Active Defense. We talked with Mobile Echo, Boxtone, not Mobile Echo, I'm sorry.
Iron.
Mobile Iron, Boxtone, AirWatch, Casper, of course, Absolute Manage, Good. We sniffed at Pinecone for a bit. We looked at all of the, Pinecone was so small we couldn't take them very seriously. Anyway, the fallout was really interesting. And what we found was, well, that's the nice way to say it, vendors are pathological liars in this space. They will say things like, oh, we can manage Androids. What they mean is, if you have nitrogen touchdown, then you can deploy that to your ActiveSync environment and let ActiveSync run it. These vendors may, like for instance AirWatch, may approach somebody like Samsung, Safe Devices, and say, give us the APIs. And so Lenovo and Samsung and one other vendor said, yeah, here are the APIs, but those are only 3 handset vendors whose APIs are accessible to any vendor. All vendors can do anything any other vendor can do. And they are all limited by the APIs available to them. Okay? So keep that in mind. They're all the same. They talk about things like whitelisting. What does whitelisting mean to you? If you say, I want to whitelist these apps, what are you thinking what you're doing? Nothing else but those apps. And you know what? That doesn't work. Especially in iOS devices. You load up the devices, you go, okay, we're going to prevent people from loading up any more devices. We'll take the App Store away. Guess what? You've just ruined the ability of a user to update. For goodness sake, I mean, that's just insane. In the name of security, you make sure to render the device in the future potentially insecure. Blacklisting, okay, yeah, maybe if you see an app on a device or something, yeah, poof, you can shut that down, or at least boot it off your network, but that's about as far as you can go. You know, try to wipe it maybe if you want to be really aggressive, but there's some things about that you want to look at. They all claim to be able to patch these systems. No, you can't. Patching's a pull, it's not a push. Right? That's why gingerbread never, ever makes it out into whatever the latest junk food, you know, that's being produced, right? Was it ice cream or whatever, jelly bean or whatever, right? It's all pull. For us, in the federal government space, we have things like FIPS requirements. These are standards by NIST, the Great Standards Agency, and encryption and things like that. And vendors will say, we're FIPS compliant. What they mean is one tiny crypto module in one part of a 7-part series of anything from data at rest to data in motion somewhere else is FIPS certified. Everything else is not. But they'll tell you they're FIPS certified. So you have to kind of dig down more deeply into that and say, where exactly are you FIPS certified? Good claims to be FIPS certified, for example, on Windows Mobile. 5. And then there's these questions about, okay, it's the same crypto module, yeah, but you're supposed to have to be able to prove it on every device. So, I mean, they'll tell these stories. It's very interesting. Certs in the federal government, we have to worry about things called PIV cards and CAT cards, and they're a nightmare. Go and pray to all of your IT gods that nobody comes up with a brilliant idea in your environment to use hardware certs for logical access, because it won't work on these devices. People build trays and shit, and it's just like, the trays cost $200 alone. And all they do is provide the cert to a logical access, and when everybody wants them to open up the device, and it's like, that's not how the iOS device works, or the Android for that matter. S-MIME is possible, right? Oh yeah, S-MIME, it's really cool. Well, if you know about, these devices, put a cert on there, and it's always on. So every single thing that you send off of your device is now encrypted over S-MIME. Everything. So somebody has to have your key everywhere you go. So, all right, but that's not so good. And here's the big thing, is that the vendors won't tell you this, but think people like AT&T and Verizon, they can do this stuff. They're not dumb. They run these services. They've taken care of all these things anyway for, in AT&T's case, it's over 100 years. It's not much for them to grab a couple of developers and say, start looking into MDM. Here are all the APIs everybody else has. And as a centralized service, they may be cheaper than anything else you've got out there. All right? So these were the good news and the bad news outcomes that I had to present to these people. And one was, well, all your silly requirements can be met. Basically, those requirements that we outlined, they can be met. But actually, that's not really what you should be thinking about. And there are two reasons why you shouldn't be thinking about it. But the first reason really comes down to, it's not really what the vendors do, but how they do it that makes them significantly different from one another. So I developed this kind of schemata of understanding how to align vendors at the time, okay? It doesn't really hold true that much anymore. There's some blending, but for the most part, you see what happens is you have TEM systems. That's telecom expense management systems. These are the guys that pool your minutes and allocate minutes, and you can go and handle that stuff to keep a tamp down on data and phone calls and stuff like that. And these guys can, as I mentioned, AT&T can also do this, Tango, some of the big names like that. They can provide MDM services as well. That was out of our scope because when you have 27 CEOs and 27 independent revenue streams, you don't centralize their cell services. They don't care. They'll run their own. But in scope, we found 3 different ways in which the MDM vendors approached their services. The one is, I'll skip this one. The second one is what I call a side-by-side service. We'll get back to the first one, side-by-side service. So our requirement was we didn't want these devices on our Exchange ActiveSync. Well, devices like vendors like MDM vendors like Boxtone, they can claim that they can boot you off of Exchange ActiveSync if you're not enrolled in Boxtone. And that's true, but they do it without getting in front of the Exchange Active Service. You sit side by side, and then what they do is they send a PowerShell script that says, here are who my people are, who's on Exchange. If they don't match up, who is ever not with me gets kicked off. So it's a kind of a reactive continual polling service, get out of the way of Exchange ActiveSync, but it doesn't actually prevent the initial login or sign up through Exchange ActiveSync. It's a reactive effect. Vendors like Casper and Absolute Manage don't even bother to try to do that, right? They will give you those profiles, but they don't. The rest of it is be damned, right? They will make ActiveSync available to you through a profile, but they're not going to try to prevent you from getting onto ActiveSync if you have the device and know the secrets magic formula sauce, right? If you have that secret sauce formula, you can hop on an Exchange ActiveSync, right? So there are side-by-side systems, and then there are gatekeeper systems. These are guys that throw, literally, a gatekeeper proxy in front of Exchange ActiveSync. And if you're not enrolled, they go in and check, proof are you enrolled? Yep, all right, you're allowed in. You shut off Exchange ActiveSync to everybody else. Only one pipe through, and they will. So that's what we went with, because that's our requirement. But at that point, what we're talking about, you see, is architectural requirement, because all the device management stuff is the same. So the first question you need to ask is, what are you trying to achieve with these, right? What do you want to control with these? Which is a wrong question to ask, by the way, but if you're looking to control it, don't ask how they manage devices. Ask where these systems reside. If what you want to control, however, is data, this is the big, big fad right now. Sandbox containerization. The only one in this space right now that has any maturity is good through enterprise, which is terrible. Now, let me be clear, let me back up. I am not a federal employee. This is not the federal government telling you don't do good. This is David Hester as an LCG contractor saying our experience with good is really interesting because essentially what it is, it's an application suite, a sandboxed application suite. And you could set it so exfiltration and infiltration of data cannot take place to that sandbox. It's a hard boundary. And everything's encrypted and all the enterprise data resides within that sandbox, which is really great. But what that means is the user of a device has to give up their native ActiveSync tools, calendars, contacts, whatever, and go into good to launch good browsers, to launch good email, to launch good contacts, to launch all of good's services that basically parallel what they have on their device. Now, at the NIH, there's a big uptick of interest in this because we prevent people from getting Exchange ActiveSync accounts by running that PowerShell script I was talking about. And users, thousands of users, have been wanting to get their email, and they'll do surreptitious things like pop an IMAP, which is just a mess for them. But they'll do that because we haven't closed those yet. They'll do that, but what they're really happy to hear is, no, you can bring your device. We won't care about the device. We won't manage the device. We'll just put good on there, and then you can get your emails and stuff. So soccer moms and dads are now really happy that they're on the field and can get their emails where they couldn't ever do that really easily ever before. So that was a really big boon for them. And we went into production 2.5 months ago. We piloted it for over a year. We went into production 2.5 months ago. And went from a pilot of 100 to now we're up to over 700 users. That's a 2 months uptick. I mean, it's huge. And we only bought like 1,000 licenses. We're going to run out of those licenses in the next month. So this is feeding a demand, but it's a demand that we created, artificially created, by preventing them from getting email access, right? So what's the other alternative? Well, now containerization is the alternative. And this is the big hot space for these vendors. So you have secure content lockers, right? And these secure content lockers ensure that the data reside only within that space, and it's associated with a profile that's pushed out by the MDM, so that when you rescind the profile, the content goes away too, right? And some of the vendors are claiming you can do that with email, kind of. The mixed space is the space that we're concerned with as a government institution. Libertarianism and other, general paranoia ideologies aside, the government actually really wants to protect your data. Google will sell your data to a vendor on the street for the right price. The government doesn't like doing that, right? So we want to keep our data and your data that we have in your hands safe and protected, and we don't want it mingling with other stuff. Because as soon as that happens, an event takes place, an IG auditor comes down and says, give me your handset. I need to run forensics on it, and hand it over to some NSA expert, and they run forensics on it, right? Suddenly, all of your pictures and photos and contacts and friends and stuff like that on your personal handset device is now subpoena-able, potentially, FOIA-able in our case. I don't know how that works in the education space. I don't know how that works in the private sector space, but it is a legal potential liability that if you're going to let BYOD take over and use some of these other vendors like AirWatch and Boxstone, whoever, who are doing these containerized spaces, to approach your legal departments and say, what happens if we're worried about an HR incident, or we're concerned about somebody stealing ideas and stuff, and they want to take away a personal phone, or we wipe and destroy personal data. At some point, I remember being told that the federal government can't do that and is liable. If you destroy personal data, we're liable for something. So Umar, protect your data. The other guys want to just sell it to everybody. So as you move these things out and you go and hop in the BYOD space bandwagon, and containerization looks like it's the key, consider those legal liabilities and options. What happens when? We think we can argue that in a containerized space like good, because the whole thing is an application suite, what we are essentially doing is managing a virtual device on a device. And a good lawyer might be able to say, hell no, you're not giving up the handset. The only thing you care about as a subpoena is the data in the container. That's it. Because that container is the device that you want to subpoena, not the physical device. But we haven't tested that, and we don't know. So the questions that I want to leave you with before we start talking about specific vendors and what they can and can't do for you is actually to kind of get you guys to rethink what it is you actually want to do with these systems. Don't think in terms of managing the handset itself. All the vendors can do that. And quite frankly, the more you manage it, the more headache it is for you. You don't want to set up an application whitelist and then have to deal with all that and shut down access to apps, App Store and stuff. You don't want to do that. Let the thing go. Let it be free. But if there are other operational requirements like, oh, we have to protect internal assets, okay, how does the vendor assure that internal assets are protected? Where does this reside in the network architecture so that I can prevent somebody from getting stuff that I want to prevent them from getting? Or if they get and take with them, I know where it is and so on. So you need to think more about what the real operational requirements are, and they are vastly different than what you are accustomed to in supporting desktops. Because these desktops have been considered commodities and you lock them down. and they are yours, and users be damned, we'll give you what we tell you you need, and then you come begging us for more. That's not how these devices work. They weren't designed to do that. You will lose that battle. So think of these operational requirements. Also, as I mentioned, the legal implications for BYOD. That boundary needs to be really hard and clear, and how do you ensure that their stuff remains private and your stuff remains yours? And if you traverse that boundary, what are the implications for you and what are the implications for your users? If you're going to BYOD space, who's going to pay for it? There's a movement in BYOD in government, and people are coming back and saying, since I'm doing email on this is work associated, you're going to start paying for at least my data plan. Cost savings go poof, out the roof. Just poof, gone. There's the idea that BYOD is going to save everybody money. That depends. You need to think about that. And then, finally, administration. All right? Who's going to administer all these devices? There are systems that actually allow tiered, well, everybody has tiered administration, right? And so some people can do more than others. Some are more equal than others. But there are systems that allow you to go and segment off whole users and assign a full admin just to those users. And so if you're in a university space and you're going to set up a centralized MDM service, you could look at those systems and say, yes, but I'm going to assign somebody in the chemistry department the job of administering their devices, in the athletics department their devices, and I'm just going to ensure that the service is running, patched, and available. So you can delegate like that. It's a new model. Now, what is not up here, and the last note I want to leave you with before we take questions, is Michael had one of the best presentations on MDMs I have seen anywhere, and you need to run up to him and talk with him, because what he's talking about with what these devices represent is the abstraction of data from the device. Whereas, as I mentioned before, where we were in a model where these devices, the data is supported on servers, on networks that we control, on devices we control, these devices are now in the field. And a whole other shift regarding how you are going to approach these devices is going to have an impact on how you are going to approach your jobs in general. Because these devices effectively take away control of the data, and now data are free. By which I mean, first time I've ever declared here in public, Hester's 2 laws of digital data. These are laws like the law of gravity, okay? Unassailable. Data replicate, data scatter. You cannot prevent them from doing either. They replicate and scatter. One implication is data are eternal. The other is you're going to have a devil of a time trying to keep data secure. So rather than focus on endpoint security as a means to doing that, you need to think about how you're going to manage data. One potential model for managing data may be this containerized approach, but I suspect in 5 years, 10 years from now, what you will see is kind of like the credit card approach, what banks do. If you want to make $1 billion, take this idea and run with it. I'm not kidding. When you have your credit card and you load it up with gas, right? And then you drive to the airport and you fly to San Francisco, and then you go to a restaurant and you do something at a restaurant. The next time you go and use that credit card, it doesn't work. And then you get something on your iPhone that says, call your credit card company. The credit card company says, yeah, what's up? Well, I just saw that you had some, things in San Francisco. Did you mean to do that? Yes. Okay, that's done. That kind of approach to data is the only way we're going to be able to manage data. We're not going to really control it. We're going to oversee it. We're going to ask questions like, these patient data, why are they over there when they should be over here? And stop that from happening and ask the stakeholder, did you mean to send that there? Yes or no? Those are the systems that are going to be in place, which means effectively that you, as people who support devices and endpoints, are not going to have to support devices and endpoints anymore. And as these devices become ubiquitous, your job is going to change, or you'll be out of a job. That's a downer, isn't it? So my recommendation is hop on the MDM train, understand the implications, don't treat them as endpoints, treat them as data devices, start figuring out what your data are and how you'd manage them, and then approach these vendors and say, what can you do to help me? That's it. Wide open now, okay? Didn't really engender much. Ooh, what a downer. I know about AirWatch. I know about Good. I know about Boxtone. Nick?
I use Casper.
Casper?
So I have previous AirWatch and Mobile Iron experience, and I have Casper, but I don't really use it for the iOS stuff, so I'll defer to Nick.
Oh, and Randy Six has a 10-minute video that I could play, or we have time to fill. But he's 10 minutes on Mass 360 and can tell you all about that as well. So the pragmatics of discussion and day-to-day use, we're happy to answer those questions now. I need to get closer to the mic. What?
Your mic is not working.
My mic is not working.
That mic's working, but your
This mic, I will turn this mic on. This mic is not working, I think. Well, right there.
Can you switch to the
Ooh, that's nice.
Bow bow.
Pass this one around.
Oh, yeah, it's good. Why don't we do that? I'll be the like dude who does this stuff. Or you just yell. Who had a question? You had a question.
Do you have any experience, or have you looked at AT&T's Toggle? No. It looks like good, but they keep talking about partitioning the phone. I know they're not.
No, they're not.
Since they're pathological liars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the coolest thing that I've seen is, actually, I got to tell you, I was impressed with the BlackBerry 10. You seen one of those yet? Mm-hmm. Somebody here has one. You slide down and it says, okay, which side do you want to work in, work or personal space? Hit personal, poof, and it comes essentially a VM that you've worked with in that space. Okay, where do you want to work now? Poof, you're over in your corporate space. It's kind of cool. That's true split space technology. But what they're talking about is something like a good container. It's not partitioning, but it's segmenting. Oh, come now. Yeah.
One of the other, I don't want to bash on Good too much, but one of the downsides I've seen to Good is it's very a la carte in its price list. So it gets really expensive really fast.
Yeah, it is. It's 3 times as much as the other vendors in our installation. And the Good product is kind of weird. It's like I get Good notifications. You're like, what is this? And oh, it was a meeting that was 15 minutes ago. Thank you. And they don't do anything in the background, right? Good doesn't do anything in the background. So you open it up and suddenly you're like, oh, here are all my email. Oh, here are all my calendar events. So we have this trend at the NIH where everybody just wants to go to Good. And I've told my the CIOs, and say, just live with it. I'm going to shut everything else off. You just try to live for a month with this. See how many meetings you get to on time. And we'll see how that experiment goes. Yeah. Thanks.
I will. I work in the private space, and you've made some excellent points about MDM and how we should approach it and think about it and help our clients, in wrestling with these devices. The client, I work for a company that's a lot of different private clients, and trying to convince them of the truth of what you're saying here in terms of thinking about data, thinking about how their employees will be using it. It's a very tricky thing. A lot of them kind of say, oh, well, they can just do what they want as long as they're not breaking anything. Besides this presentation, what other resources might there be to maybe show to a CFO to convince them of the importance of thinking in this way?
I was going to start with for just as a slightly off topic, but a resource in general that people should be looking forward towards if your questions aren't being answered is the enterpriseios.com website, which has this gigantic chart of like what MDMs do and don't do.
Yeah, that's an impressive chart.
Yeah.
It's a very insane matrix. I mean, they really covered all the bases there, and they're getting the details are only being added to every time they update the chart, so they're adding more and more granularity over what MDMs offer and what services offer. And now, of course, every company in the world that, even knows about mobile phones has an MDM service. Even Symantec has one.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of finding the pieces that really, as David said, find the pieces that you need the most, and then find the service model that works with the structure you've got already in place. And then that will probably be the best accommodation, because the more that you have to restructure everything around your new MDM policy, the more, you're going to have a rocky road for quite a while until people get used to it. So I'm always recommending people not try to have the tail wag the dog. Mm-hmm. Find the structure that you've got, figure out what company will work with what you've got without having to change and reinvent the wheel, and then find one that has the price that you want to pay.
So kind of in a sense, you're saying find the tool that best meets the requirements of what you think the client would need. Should present them with the possibilities.
Who's your client?
We have various ones. We have a publishing client. Yeah. We have big pharma clients. We have some smaller hedge fund clients. It's a wide range.
So pharma's a good one, right? Pharma's going to come out and say, we need to have FDA regulations, HIPAA, if you're dealing with patient data. So that's stuff that you need to say, well, this MDM will, they all will probably say that they will be so-and-so regulated and compliant, but dig deeper into that.
Yeah. Use this model, quite frankly, because now they're up to 90 vendors. It's insane. Use this model and use it to parse those requirements for yourself. Do what you need is securing of data through containerization. Do you simply need ease of enrollment, or do you need some sort of gatekeeping? And then along those lines, you can go and look in a Gartner quadrant and ascertain and that matrix and go, okay, how do these work to meet those requirements? But the 90 can be parsed into basically these 4 or 3 structures. And don't get overwhelmed by that. But I had a flash of insight at the beginning of this process as they were talking about all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, actually, the more we talk, the more it becomes clear that there are only like 3 things that are happening. And they all have to do with where they fit on the network. So take the 90 and soon to be 150, vendors and divide them into these systems, into this system, and ask yourself which system is appropriate for which.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Who wants it next?
Real quick, you had mentioned a presentation by someone named Mike, so I'm not familiar with the last name.
Brodt? He was here, Brodt, B-R-O-D-T. He did, yeah, he did. You are the talking stick.
Well, I am now. I guess I'll ask the room something at least I've found a challenge. I'd like to know, based, if someone has an answer, what sector you're in and whether your employer or client is still approaching BYOD as a potential cost savings. And if they had, and you've convinced them otherwise, what was your strategy?
Who's doing that?
So, okay, show of hands. Who's got BYOD going on right now?
And who thinks it's a savings? Who can demonstrate?
Whose boss thinks it's a savings?
Savings.
Actually, relevant it was a saving was for a Fortune 50 company that was used to paying a per employee fee for HPES. And because BYOD was not under their realm, they had showed actual savings.
So an accounting answer to savings.
Right.
TCO goes up, accounting says it's cheaper. Okay.
Ours is less than a phone space where we want to put a computer labs on campus thinking that supporting every individual laptop, that stuff will run on the computer.
And a stat slow. So.
You are the keeper of the stick now.
You're up.
For the stick.
So in terms of MDM, if you're just looking to encrypt the data and make sure that people have certain policy, are you really getting a lot if you go to a specific MDM vendor versus going through Exchange ActiveSync policies?
No.
Okay.
No, in fact, that's the big question right now. We've settled on 3 vendors, Good and Boxstone for reporting. Boxstone's excellent for reporting. Its network situational awareness is phenomenal. So Boxstone can tell you what's going on with BES services, ActiveSync services, Good services, and maybe even AirWatch. I don't know. It's a really bright thing, but that's about all it does really well. And AirWatch, well, the more we talk about it, the more that's such a heavy lift for something that if we really thought about it, all we want to do is ensure that passcodes are enforced and the data are encrypted. Well, guess what? ActiveSync does that. Just put them in ActiveSync and be damned with all these other vendors.
Yeah, the thing I think that we would like is the safe hardware reporting saying that everything's turned on all the time. But it seems like a high cost to get that with these solutions.
Maybe Casper can do that?
It's not really designed for that kind of specific functionality.
Right.
I think that's a much harder angle than Casper aims for.
Yeah.
Casper really does aim to be much more on the lighter side, and that's again, I mean, as K-12 education, kind of as a counterpoint to what David is saying. I don't have to worry about secure data. I don't have to worry about regulations. Our secure data is a 4th grade essay on how Cortez invaded South America and killed off all the natives, right? That's our secure data right there. No one really cares that much, honestly. So it's, it's Pages products and Keynote slides. So I'm just curious, how many other people here don't care in the slightest about secure data like that because they just have to worry about devices that get the apps they want? Is there anybody who falls in that category? Right, okay, so for us, our primary goal here is to make sure that the students can get the apps that we provide them, they can get online, and they can access our local shares, our web dev shares, they can access Dropbox, our e-backpack, stuff like that. Our needs are very simple. And Casper is absolutely great for meeting these simple needs for us because it really works on an individualized device basis. And then for the machines that I need to have identical clones, like a cart full of iPads that I move around from classroom to classroom, I just supervise those as a configurator.
Right.
And again, I don't have to worry about making evaluations about data security. That wasn't part of my equation when I was looking at MDMs. I was looking at what makes it easiest for the user, what makes it easiest for us, what gives us the most functionality and the best bang for our buck in the user experience not being ruined. Because these devices, the best part of these iOS devices is their expandability. If you take away that app store, you've just taken away the best part of iOS.
Yeah.
That ecosystem is what drives them. That ability to explore interesting ideas that some developers come up with and the ability to adopt these ideas into a learning environment, into a productivity environment, that's what makes iOS so special. And that's also why Android, in a lot of ways, has to struggle in an educational environment because there's so much more management that has to happen compared to iOS. So for me, my goal is, can I make it easy to get apps? Can I make it easy to provide apps? Can I make it easy for them to use everything iOS offers? I don't lock down. I nudge.
Now, what about asset management? In some cases, I was talking with somebody at Notre Dame University, he's in here. They've decided that these devices at $400 a crack and a $7 billion endowment are consumable. So they're going to buy a $400 device, hand it to somebody who configure it, and they don't care if it gets lost, right? In an education space that has that kind of money, they don't care, it's consumable. But if it's not consumable, then you need to have something like, I don't know, an AirWatch, a Mass, or something like that, so that you can track and trace these and keep an inventory on them. So if that's a requirement, you can't just go with a simple side-by-side system like Casper or Absolute Manage. You're going to have to, well, maybe Absolute Manage may be better at this than Casper, but you may have to step up your game.
We've also found that certain protocols you can't really turn off because you either break other machines or you have user protests. So for example, the webmail. If you containerize, but you still have webmail open, nothing preventing your user from going to the non-containerized side and using the webmail and downloading attachments. So it really still comes back to the user in many of these things. We can't turn the webmail off because we have travelers who would be, incensed.
Yeah.
Just a show of hands, is there any organizations out there that are looking for these devices to replace a laptop/desktop in your environment? So,
How's that going?
yeah.
Well, K-12.
K-12 is pretty straightforward.
K-12 is pretty straightforward. That's one vertical that works.
It took about a year though before our teachers realized that these are not laptops.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And whatever websites they insisted on using the previous year, why can't I use that? And I had to have an actual sit down with everybody and tell them, stop treating it like a laptop. This is a different device. You need to work within the framework that it provides you, not pick up, package your lesson plan, and drop it on this device, and then get angry at me when it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. What other experiences have you had?
Going back a little bit,
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest differences, and we certainly talked about it already, but biggest differences just between Exchange ActiveSync, which, has some of the MDM APIs, and a full-blown MDM is, ability to push apps, volume purchase program, and things like that. So if apps are important to you, that's when you need to make that leap to full-blown MDM.
Well, the other thing that Exchange ActiveSync does more heavy-handed than an MDM is it only allows device wipe, right? So these MDM vendors, because these services that you push out are profile-based, you can do what's called an enterprise wipe, which pulls the profile and then anything associated with that profile. But in the meantime, everybody's personal data, unaffiliated with those profiles, remains intact. So you have those options through an MDM service. But again, it's what's necessary.
Yeah, and apps that are pushed, I'll use the air quotes and say pushed via an MDM are considered managed. So if you get Angry Birds via the MDM, you can remove Angry Birds via the MDM. If you already have Angry Birds, you can't remove it via the MDM. So managed apps are important.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most critical things to keep in mind with any kind of MDM in general, especially with iOS, which is part of my role here, is that, as David said, you ultimately cannot take control away from the user. That is Apple's stringent requirement, is that the user always has the ability, ultimately, to say no to pretty much anything you do to the iPad. And if they want to, they could just take the iPad, erase factory settings, and they have a nice, fresh iPad that's not managed anymore. So the only way you can really get buy-in to the whole process is to incentivize. You've got to offer a carrot that dangles in front of their face. So when you attach a carrot to the iPad, you say, okay, you follow my management scheme, I'll give you instant access to directory services, instant access to your email. We'll load up the containers to let you access your work data, things like that. That's what keeps them going. The lockdown, the draconian lock strategy ends up being a stick. And what do you do when you get hit by a stick? You walk away from the stick, right? Mm-hmm. They end up wiping the device and they say, well, fine, I'll just do it my way, or they just don't use it. And then you don't get the productivity you want. And MDM vendors, as David said, they'll try and tell you, oh, no, you don't have to worry about that. They can't turn off this stuff. They can't get away from it. Yes, they can.
Yes, they can.
Plug it into a computer, wipe it, go into restore mode by holding down the power button and the home button long enough, factory reset. There's all these different ways to get past the MDM.
Oh, they don't even have to do that. All they have to do is go into settings, general, profile.
Yeah, erase the profile.
Erase the profile.
Yeah.
Poof. And Apple will not let that profile be, you can't lock that profile. You can lock all the child profiles associated with it, but not the main profile. So, gone. I like Apple's approach myself. This isn't BlackBerry. BlackBerry is not working for a reason, right? These aren't BlackBerry devices. Everybody wants them to be like BlackBerry devices in my enterprise space, in my government space, but they're not. They're not meant to be, and that's why they are as ubiquitous as they are.
You can remove the profiles except for the configurator profile.
You cannot remove supervision. That's the one trick Apple gets to pull that Apple cheats on. Supervision, they cheat. You cannot get rid of that one without restoring the device.
I've come to the conclusion at the end of the entire school year of using Configurator that it's not working for us. And so I wanted to remove it before summer break and let the kids go home. Yeah, they're going to go home with an empty iPad.
It wipes.
Right.
You unsupervised, it wipes. Yeah. Configurator is an amazing tool for certain very specific things.
Labs.
If anything else tries to fit into that mold, it's your worst nightmare. It's just terrifying. Every time I use it, something terrible happens. I mean, you know, kittens get punched, dogs fall out windows, lightning strikes, meteors hit, you know, it's just terrifying. But it's really good at what it does, which is make 20 iPads look exactly the same so that kids can't go around deleting all your stuff.
And for that part, it's fantastic. But for the other 200 iPads on campus, it's definitely been a square peg in a round hole.
But it's not an MDM, and it never will be, and never should be. It's a tool to supervise devices. So anybody who's running a BYOD program or who's worried about securing data, vendors will give you flexibility. Configurator is the opposite. It's not about flexibility. Configurator will give you control to a very, very limited degree.
Now you realize, if you're in the little boot camp, you may have heard me say this, that the MDM vendors are going to take over the desktop space, right? It's all profile management. All they have to do is make available, and they already have, the Mac OS X profiles for the desktops. So you won't need Open Directory anymore in the future.
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah, well...
You mentioned
whether or not you like that, you know, it's the directive. They're going to profile space, and profiles have their issues on desktops, right? It's an always on. But those vendors will be available. So, I mean, in theory, you could sell this as a way to manage your Macs. You're going to have to sell it to somebody about why do you want this particular MDM? Well, because we can also manage your Macs.
Casper has iOS and Mac functionality. Right. You can buy the package separately. We don't use the Mac side. We just use the iOS side. But there are plenty of people here, like Rich, who uses the Casper for Mac. Yeah. And you can ask the people, you know, they're over there in the corner. You can ask them about the tools, and they'll give you the whole spiel.
It's a managing Macs with profiles. Not that BYOD and Mac is that big, but I've seen it where they just want to have kind of a light touch. I want you to have a password. I want you to have this, that. That's a good solution for that. It's not going to give you full-blown, hey, you can't push apps and push updates and things like that, but pretty good. Hey, Nick, you mentioned you're doing connecting to SharePoint from your iOS devices?
No.
No? You're connecting to shares.
Yeah, like Dropbox, eBackpack, WebDAV, things like that. You can do, you know, if you feel adventurous and you've got some good developers on hand, you can make any kind of WebDAV system you've got. You know, pretty much anything that you can make a WebDAV out of and register a URI for it, iOS apps can share to. So when you install an app like Dropbox, Google Drive, or something like that, and then you've got a document in Keynote on your iOS phone or iOS device, and you want to go to share, and you see the list of options for email, Twitter, messages, things like that. All those URIs you registered through WebDAV, they'll show up there. So if you want to develop an in-house app that has your own, you know, company-wide, school-wide, institutional WebDAV, that'll work just great. Or find one of the many vendors who's willing to accommodate private, public, whatever. Dropbox, they kind of pretend to have an educational thing going on. They're kind of lying about it, but they pretend. eBackpack is a great thing for education. It's, you know, educational online backpack system, but you know, a lot of people really underestimate how much extensibility you've got if you're willing to pay the $100 a year for a developer account. You know, that developer account gives you early access to the iOS betas. You can see the new things coming down the pipe. Have you guys seen the iOS 7 rumors? Right? I'm sure everybody has read about someone saying, okay, well, here's a new concept for how we're going to redesign iOS 7. It's going to be flat. And it's, you know, we're changing everything. And then the thing that worries me the most, the rumor that I hear is we're going to add some new management features for mobile device vendors and for management solutions in the future. You know what I hear when someone says that? They're going to break everything. Because, you know, Apple, we all know, with Apple you have to be flexible. Apple can change the rules at any time. At any point, update comes down the pipe, they can completely rearrange how the whole process works. And we have to live with it, because when you buy a new device, you don't get a choice what it comes with. Apple decides that for you. So it's, one of the things you want to measure with an MDM's capability is how on the ball are they about keeping up? Because that will really be a huge factor. And, if you're buying new devices on a regular basis and your MDM vendor is 3 months behind every time.
Oh yeah, one of the reasons that we went with at least 2 of the systems that we went with was because the other vendors that we were piloting were so far behind the curve that at the end of the pilot they finally presented us with an update. It's like, yeah, you know what, too late. I'm sorry. And if it's that late during a pilot phase when you know that you have the potential to manage over 5 to 10, 15,000 devices, and that doesn't incentivize you enough to get your development crew working, we don't want to have anything to do with you. On the other hand, I get AirWatch, for instance, and those guys have like $200 million in new venture capital, and they're developing like crazy right now. And there's an update now and an update in another 2 weeks, and it's just like, holy smokes, these guys are on the ball. As far as that web dev and stuff like that, yeah, Dropbox Teams kind of sucks. I'm not supposed to say that, but it's kind of pokey. But there are, if you need something in education, set education aside. The 2 people who aren't in education in the room, right? If you need something more substantial and on-prem, because in the government space we don't want to give your data to Google servers because we don't know where those servers are and who has access to them. If you need them on-prem, I have a couple of vendors that we're looking at. One of them that's pretty good is Active Echo. It's kind of pokey, but it's effective, and it's low overhead, and it's pretty, yeah, it's all right. And that shares like a Dropbox from here, and then the mobile Echo is what you have on your device. And those 2 together kind of work as an effective system. But there are others that we're looking at, too.
Yes, AirWatch's container can reach into SharePoint and
yeah. AirWatch is also developing a secure browser that can go through the on-prem proxy, so that if you had a VPN, you don't have to VPN through the web browser in the next build.
Somebody else take the microphone, please.
Ask a question.
Is anyone out there looking at what is now being called MAMs, mobile application management? Mobile app stores, where you just, it's sort of like good, but they don't even go as far as good. It's just a gateway to get to apps, essentially. No one? Not really? Okay. Just curious.
Well, yeah, why don't you elaborate on that? Because the one thing that I didn't touch base on is that we started in the mobile device management sphere because we were worried about endpoint. But with the shift to containerization, what they're talking about now is mobile content management and mobile application management. And that's, again, that abstraction of data from device. So the MDM vendors, they realize that what they're providing is really irrelevant and not enough. What they're looking for is how to empower application distribution and use and get metrics on that and make the data secure as well.
Yeah. So the one that comes to mind is Aperion, who's been around in a couple of years now. They've been doing basically it's a front that you basically launch this app, but the app is the gateway where you have to enter credentials or whatever security measures you want, and to get you access to either enterprise level apps that are internally developed, or I think App Store apps as well that are, if you just happen to want them to use that version of whatever that is. So. But it's, again, that's not touching the device. The whole idea is that you leave their whole mantra is you leave the original user experience for the person, but for the work stuff, it's containerized, it's sectioned off. The reason I bring up Aperion, and this kind of goes back to vendors, I don't want to say lie or pathological liars. So Aperion's a really interesting one because a couple of months ago they announced full screen control for iOS devices. And they gave this really flashy YouTube video, and it has been vaporware ever since. So everyone got very excited for that, 2 months after the video was released, and it looks really amazing, and it's a live demo of them using this app and going back and forth and doing basically VNC level control remotely. and they were touting things like low bandwidth, could do it over the internet and over WAN, and it sounded, again, too good to be true. It might come out, but that's something that always intrigued me. Was like, how did they get around
on a jailbroken device?
Yeah, but they're touting non-jailbroken as well. So now they were like, now, and again, it's been vaporware ever since.
Yeah. There's a team of Apple engineers in a room laughing into their drinks right now.
Probably, actually.
All the way to the bank.
All the way to the bank, yeah.
You talked about updates and how the vendor talk about password.
I will say so far the experience is, well, so I try as much as I can to not change the user experience from retail, because the farther away you get away from what Apple wants you to do, the more headaches you get all the way up and down the line. And that's just true. I mean, that's been true for Macs, of course, we all know that. And that's true for iOS even more so when we have even less control over how it works. So as much as I can, I offer the apps, users do the updates. I don't like trying to pretend push things, because you can't really push to iOS. You make users want to pull it. But there are mechanisms in place for kind of enforcing app policy, meaning you have to have this app in order to stay enrolled, to get access to all these network resources. You have to have the following criteria being met. That's way more complicated than I want to go for education. I imagine there are a number of, private, public services, especially government, that may want to have more stringent requirements because they need to. So they can probably tell you more, but I will say, just from my experience, the more you give users the agency to do what they want and feel like they're in control, the more they'll respect the device, the more of a sense of ownership they get out of it. We don't want, especially with kids, we don't want them to treat the devices like a commodity. We want them to treat it like a personal tool that they're using to, improve their educational experience. And that's also true in corporate. We want people to use the devices as a tool to accomplish work. So we want them to respect it. And they'll do that if they feel like they own it. They'll do it if they feel like it's really something they get to work with. The more that they feel like they're just an observer to the experience you've dictated for them, the less, I think just the less buy-in you're going to get, the less interest you're going to get. So I really don't want to force my users to do what I say when it comes to doing updates. The really only important thing to keep in mind, and this has actually bit us a bunch of times, is that app updates, you really need to be careful about testing out app updates for critical things you've got, because it's entirely possible that a developer releases an app update that requires a new version of the OS that you don't have deployed yet. So when iOS for iMovie just got updated, the last two updates removed iOS 5 compatibility, which for the most part isn't a big deal, but we still have a bunch of iPad 1s that we're still using, which can't run iOS 6. All of a sudden, we now have 8 devices that we just gladly updated that can't run iMovie anymore. So this can happen at any time with any app and any developer. They have the ability to make these choices. And if you don't know about it ahead of time, you can end up being stuck in the mud. So if you want to control the user experience without controlling the user experience, I know it sounds weird, but it really just test ahead of time and then tell your people, educate your people and say, this is what we have available, this is what you can do, I recommend you follow this path. Or you say, no, I don't recommend you update. We have some things we need to get done still. Don't make any changes in the middle of a critical project.
One of the interesting things about that light touch approach is, at least we find in both the government and private sector, is that it's the C-level execs that bring these devices in. It's the C-level execs that want to have nothing to do with MDMs, right? They don't want you to touch them. So they kind of set the example. That makes it easy to say, well, he doesn't, so maybe we don't have to more broadly. That can kind of backfire on you. Is that, yeah, but he's a CEO, right? But they kind of set that stage of user experience and the expectations of the users by bringing these in and saying, just get me on email. Okay. Anything else? No. Okay. Okay. We'll leave that alone. How are you all handling app provisioning, or more importantly, procurement? Yeah, we have this. You want to hear our convoluted government process? Yeah, we can do VPP, and there's a big backlash on it now because you have no control over what Apple ID gets burned with it. right? And we don't use configurator, right? So we're essentially giving away taxpayer money.
We have the same problem. You can't
get it back up. And
that's what we have to do to CCP and government. Because they still refuse to treat, and I was going to ask Randy this. Randy, your environment, are you, sorry, I hope it's me.
Randy's not here.
Randy's not here.
Nick.
I don't know if they,
Nick.
In your K-12 environment, do you treat apps as consumable? If so, how did you get that successful?
Short answer, yes. Long answer, yes. Okay, so really, you can't, as you said, you cannot stop a user from randomly changing the Apple ID and just taking one of your apps. You can't stop it. No matter how hard you try, unless you're supervising the device with the configurator and you're literally taking the device in your own hands and typing in an Apple ID and password, they will always have the option of changing to a different account that you don't control, or any account they want, and registering your $500 app that you just purchased for medical industries, for example, have this problem all the time, and it's gone. It is, for us, it's actually kind of easy because schools have a very long history and very large mechanisms in place for making people buy things that go away. They buy textbooks, they buy pencils, they buy paper 20 years ago. Now it's, they buy keyboards and stuff like that. But, for us, it's not too hard of a stretch to say this is something that you just consume as part of being in the school, because schools are used to that. In government and business, that's a lot of it. That's a lot harder to swallow. But we also have a mechanism for pulling back from that. We have a way of saying, okay, we are now offering a one-to-one iPad program from 5th grade all the way to 12th grade. We charge our users, our families, a $225 fee, not to pay for the iPad. The iPad is part of being at the school. What they're paying for is the service, the labor, the work that we put into managing the devices and providing them with the opportunities to use these devices. It's, the fees for the program structure, not for you're just paying a chunk of this iPad. So that's really a big policy question. And that can be fixed if you're able to convince people who are in charge of making policies how to approach it in a soft way. It's one of those things where you could try having a technology answer to it, but the work involved in trying to control what Apple ID is being used is just not worth it. It's just not feasible. A user always has the ability to make your life miserable, often without even realizing it. That's why we're Mac admins. We're used to that.
The iCloud find is a huge source of pressure.
Yeah.
Permanently finding enterprise Apple ID personal iCloud.
Yeah,
We only had one user that got through because we had to walk away from enterprise Apple ID.
Oh, yeah, wow.
There's no such thing as an enterprise Apple ID.
That's the basic problem.
Belong to our enterprise.
Yeah, you can make an Apple ID that you control, and you can't tell, and just don't tell anybody what the password is. But then they can't put apps on it. They can't they can't put updates on it. They can't really do anything with an Apple ID they don't control. Apple really works hard to make sure you don't get to play with multiple Apple IDs. And until that changes, should that ever wonderful, joyous day ever come and it rains confetti and ice cream from the skies, we'll all be glad. But up until that point, you get one Apple ID to use, and they'll punish you heavily for doing anything else. And institutional Apple IDs, the layered model they describe in their iOS 6 official deployment guide on the website, when they talk about the layered model where you have an institutional and a personal. Have you ever actually tried doing that?
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
We do that.
How's that working for you?
Working great. We use configurator for the VPC code,
That's-
and then
yeah.
we use Hester to just basically for remote. It's basically support. So if somebody forgets the passcode, we can remotely reset or change the policy on how long it has to be or something like that. We have a very small pool of devices, and we use VPP, Apple ID, put the codes in the configurator, look at the iPads, assign them, we use the checkout feature, and then I can come up with passcode.
That's great. I mean, configurator, that model for configurator, if it's
Yeah.
tethered, that works.
Well, again, we have a small pool, so
I want to get myself out of trouble, so let me explain what we actually do at the federal government, or what we've seen at the NIH, rather than just give away your money, because we don't. The person has to go and put in a procurement request to an administrative officer, who then gets onto her NIH Apple ID account and gifts the app to them, then the redemption code comes in. At that point, we have no control over, right, which Apple ID they use, but for the most part, they'll use whatever default we left them with, kind of thing. And if they go ahead and do it privately, well, what can we do about it? But that way, we can at least trace, the AO has the ability to look at what's been gifted. Problem is, I think that you can only gift one particular app so many times, or something kind of crazy like that. So if everybody wants this AO to get pages, and there's 25 of them, there's some problem with that. So we even resort to gift cards.
Well, we have some areas that do that, where they use their P card to purchase the app.
Yeah, the P card.
After the request has gone through the process. Or to prove that they can use the P card on a Apple ID that isn't a personal one.
Right.
And then it's an Apple ID for the ones.
Yeah.
How are you getting around taxes? Federal. Or you're not.
You can get tax-exempt cards, buy them retail if worse comes to worse.
That's the magic question we've never been able to answer.
The government procurement, you know, Kafka? Yeah. These officers at the end of the fiscal year work night and day to close out their accounts. But the process by which they have to go through to do this is heroic in stature and requirements. So what they do is a mystery. They know they need to follow rules, they'll figure it out. And they do, and Apple really tries to help. Absolutely, as best it can. But I know if we bulk purchase from VPP, we pay taxes, and it can be sent, the tax can be sent back to us. And we have to. Oh, well, you're Ed? The EDU? Local. Well, I may have to ask my rep about that, because that was kind of one of those,
We're in a gray area. We can purchase off the local government structure or the K-12 structure, whichever. Sometimes we pay all the time today.
We don't pay, I know we don't pay tax, but I don't know how it is we get that tax or prevent paying that tax. How we get the tax money back or
I know what I want to look at the purchasing structure that we have to go through in terms of approval. We don't have the option to do apps as consumable as yet. It's actually been written into county law what constitutes a software license, and the language encompasses an app. And the way they wrote it is a very specific language. An app is an application managed. This file is a software license for the people that are approved to purchase software licenses is very small. The number of people that have to approve a VPP purchase, for example, I think I exclusively approved that each $1 app actually costs $26 a payroll app in order to purchase a single 99-cent app. And I thought that I would present this as an astonishing number. I gave them the flow chart, I gave them the number based on approximate salaries of people involved in the amount of time required, and I was perceived with an audible doing. So I described it all out as Byzantine flowchart and Visio, and they're like, yeah, this is great.
I'm at higher ed at Florida State, and one of the issues we've gone through for the last 3 months is our program facilitator, the primary one on campus, his wife doesn't have triplets. So he's been out of work for the last 3 months. And he was the only one who had access to the portal. But one thing that we've done at the university, and it might help some other people, I haven't heard this mentioned very much, is we took all our Apple IDs that get generated, and we've actually made a distribution list. So we can add and remove different email accounts from the actual Apple IDs and stuff. Because we ran into several issues where people in various departments that didn't want to be part of the board collective, they would take off and leave and go to another job, and there was no documentation whatsoever for any of the Apple ID information. So all those apps that were purchased with those Apple IDs were just gone. And so we did that also to satisfy our purchasing department. So we have the purchasing department, their distribution list nested inside of the distribution list with Apple ID. So any Apple ID that gets used on campus, if passwords change on it or anything that's purchased on it, the purchasing department is automatically notified.
I think you're around here together, you have to keep it anonymous. Anyone on any of those messages listed anonymously take control of ownership of that app.
They don't know all the mean,
That's
the
a-
passcodes and the questions to answer. I mean,
Oh, okay. I was going to say security through obscurity. It's the favorite way to go.
One thing now, this is not necessarily, will never solve local, state, federal government, because they're entirely bureaucracy. One thing a lot of businesses don't think about is they're always worried about losing that. Oh my God, I'm going to lose that. I paid $5 and lose that. A lot of new employees will bring apps with them. So yeah, you may lose some going out, but you may gain some coming in.
No, and that's a good point. Right. In the BYOD space, the assets that can be brought to your environment will probably significantly outweigh the assets that are vulnerable when you hand them out to it. Well, we have 41 seconds, so thank you very much for your time here. I hope you learned something, and I'll put up my email here. Do feel free to ping me, and I'm on the Mac OS Enterprise list as well. And thank you. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Nick. And I'll make available Randy Six's 10-minute video on the foibles and wonders of Mass 360, okay? All right.